All right, guys, we're going to go over the window notes for point of view. You have access to this PowerPoint. You can open it up and get everything that you need just by reading it, but I'm also going to go through the PowerPoint with you right now so that you can kind of get a little extra information. So I need you to open up this window notes file inside of Kami and take notes as I go through this PowerPoint with you. Just pause the video and write things down. You can flip back and forth between the tabs and put down what you need. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a slideshow that will tell us about all these different terms here for like first person, third person, limited. And I'm going to give you examples. Now, what I want you to do is just write down the example. And if you feel like you need it, you can put kind of some extra information down as well. Okay, so without further ado, let's go ahead and flip over to our PowerPoint here. So first of all, let's get some terms out of the way. Point of view is the term used to describe how a story is told. This goes with who is telling it, not necessarily like if it's being spoken or written, but who is telling this story really kind of is what point of view gets across. Now, the narrator is the term we use to describe the person telling the story. So if I say that it's a first person narrator, that means the person telling the story is the first person in the story. And then a pronoun is something we should all be familiar with, but just in case you're not, it is a word that replaces a name. For example, I would replace your own name if you were talking. She would replace your friend's name if you're talking about them, and you would replace the name of the person that you're talking to. Okay, so let's start with first person. We're going to do an example here where we're going to meet a guy named Kevin, and I'll show you in a second here what it would be like to have Kevin tell a story in first person. So first person is told from the perspective of the characters. In the example we're about to see, the character's name is Kevin, so Kevin is the one telling the story. It uses pronouns like I and we. And you'll see that we'll continue making any pronoun in blue. The narrator is the character. In other points of view, the narrator is never actually in the story. So this is kind of the real unique part of first person, is that the narrator is inside the story. The story is being told as if it were being told to you by a friend. They only know their side of the story. If your friend starts telling you a story about them going to the mall and they tell you exactly what was going on inside of the head of the person selling them a dress, then they're probably lying to you. Unless they're a mind reader, then that's a different story altogether. So let's look at our first example here with Kevin. If he was telling his story from the first person point of view, he would say something like this. My name is Kevin, and I just went on the best date of my life. Her name was Samantha, and I think she really liked me. Okay, pretty self-explanatory. Kevin is the person in the story. He's the person telling the story, and he can only give you his side of things. Okay, so take a second right now to flip back over to your window notes and write down this example. All right, let's look at the next point of view. This is third person limited. Okay, third person is when a story is being told about someone else. So the narrator is not one of the characters now. The narrator is telling the story about the characters. The narrator is an outside observer looking in. Look at our picture here of this girl looking out the window. This is our narrator. She's looking in at the story. She's not a part of it. She can tell you what she saw through that window, but her perspective through the window is going to be quite limited, unless she sticks her head out or something and looks around. Okay, in third person, we're always going to use names of people and then pronouns like he, she, and they. I would imagine that most things that you've read so far have been in third person. And I imagine if you ever tell a story just to a friend, you're probably not going to tell it in third person. You're going to tell it in first. So the thing about third person limited is that the narrator only knows one side of the story. Think of that window as limiting their point of view to just the one side of the story. So just like when Kevin told his own story, now we still only know what was going on with Kevin. So here's what's going on if we write his story out in third person limited. Kevin felt like it had been a fantastic date as he left her at the door. He could only guess that Samantha would be calling her friends to say how much she liked him. So once again, this story is being told about Kevin. We're getting his thoughts and his side of the story, but we don't know what's going on with Samantha. Now, as the kids say, I'm about to end this man's whole career. But before I do, make sure you take a second to write down that example under your third person limited. Now, where did it go? There it is. Oops. There it is. All right, our next example here, this is absolutely going to destroy Kevin. I feel so bad for poor Kevin here. We're going to learn about third person omniscient. So just like in third person limited, this is being told about the characters. The narrator is not in the story. They're outside looking in. But now the outside narrator is looking down. Think of the difference between looking out a window of a building and looking out of the window of a plane. You can see a whole lot more when you're looking down as the omniscient narrator. It still uses the pronouns he, she, and they as one way to look and see quickly that it is in third person. But now the narrator knows both sides of the story, or every side of the story if there's more than two. Omniscient is a word that means all-knowing. So some people have recently started calling this third person unlimited. If that makes more sense to you to call it unlimited than omniscient, then make a note of that in your head. So now that we have a narrator who can tell Kevin's story from both sides, let's absolutely destroy this man. Kevin felt like it had been a fantastic date as he left her at the door, but Samantha was already calling her friends to tell them how bad it was. My apologies, dear friend. Kevin, you have been destroyed by our third-person omniscient narrator who knows both sides of the story and can tell us what Samantha was thinking. So make sure you take a second to go over to your window notes and write that down under third-person omniscient. If it helps you, you can also write down unlimited. All right, moving on. What if we wanted a narrator that tells both sides of the story but wasn't going to absolutely destroy poor Kevin? Then we have a third-person objective narrator. Objective means you don't take sides. So the objective narrator, he doesn't care. He doesn't care if Kevin got the girl or didn't get the girl. He's just going to tell the facts. Third-person objective narrator is still being told from the outside. The narrator is not part of the story. And now it's an impersonal narrator. Impersonal, of course, meaning that they just don't care. They just don't care what's going on. They're just going to give the facts. It still uses the pronouns he, she, and they. And the narrator is going to tell the story as if they were a reporter telling the facts. They'll never tell you the thoughts and feelings of the characters. That's the important distinction. So if we look at our example here, now we're not going to hear that Kevin thought it was a good date and that Samantha didn't think it was a good date. We're outside of their heads. We're not seeing their exact thoughts and emotions and feelings. We just know what happens. Here it is. Kevin left Samantha at the door. He walked away with a smile on his face. Samantha got out her phone and called her friends. Of course, that's the same exact story that we heard last time, only now, since our narrator is objective, he's not trying to destroy Kevin. Okay, so take a second to write that down on your window notes under third person objective. We have just one more, and there's no spot on your window notes for it. This is just something I want you to be aware of, that there is a second person point of view. The second person point of view is told about the reader. So this is if I were to sit down across from you and say, you should do your homework. That would be in the second person point of view. I like to think of second person as a written selfie, right? You're reading this story, but it's really just about yourself. So here's Kevin's story, but written in second person. Now it's about you. You leave Samantha at the door and walk away feeling like you had the greatest date in your life. Again, we only get the one side of the story. We're no longer into the unlimited territory where we get to see that Samantha wasn't a fan of the date. Okay, so if you would like to, you can copy that down, kind of down here at the bottom, maybe second person, and then put the example if you would like, but that is, of course, optional. So let's go through just a few examples here. If you had come to class, you would have had the opportunity for bonus points, but let's just kind of go through some examples. There was a fire so precious to him, so close and sweet a thing, the yellow and red flames brightened the dark interior of the shelter, the happy crackle of the dry wood as it burned, that he could not leave it. This passage is in third person, limited because there is only one person in this story, and they're called he. So we've got our pronoun he, tells us it's in third person. Now, how do we know it's limited? We know that it's limited because there's only one person, and we know that it's not objective because we get to see his feelings. He thinks the fire is precious, he's happy about it, and he feels like he can't leave. Okay, so that's our first example there of limited. Here's our next example. I was the first one up the next morning. Soda must have pulled my shoes off for me. I was still wearing my jeans. He must have been too sleepy to undress himself, though, as he lay stretched out beside me, fully clothed. This is, of course, from The Outsiders, and Soda and the narrator here are brothers. So don't get any crazy ideas. This passage is in first person because there's only one person, and the narrator calls themselves I. They are in the story, and telling us what happened to them. And since it's just the one person, we only get their point of view. He has to guess at the feelings of the other characters. You can see up there in green, he must have been too sleepy. He can't say for certain that the other person was sleepy because he's not that other person. Next example, the people of Alexandria, Indiana have a lot of traditions. They have a parade every year at homecoming that goes through the entire town and takes 45 minutes to finish. The strangest thing, though, is that they pass out the candy by throwing it in the middle of the street. The little ones run out to get it. Someone's going to get run over one day. This passage is in third-person objective because it tells us about multiple people. We get to see everyone's side of the story if there were multiple people in it. But this narrator doesn't tell us their thoughts or their feelings. It doesn't say that the people of Alexandria, Indiana loved their homecoming tradition. It didn't tell us that the little ones were watering at the mouth to eat the delicious candy. It just kind of takes a step back and tells us the facts. So this is objective. Our next example, she had never heard her teacher talk about point of view, but she thought it was a really interesting concept. And her teacher was really cool for being able to explain it to her class. This passage is in third person omniscient because it tells us about two people. We've got she, this unnamed girl, and the teacher, who is really cool, just like all teachers, right? And we get to know both sides of their story. We get to know about the girl thinking that it's an interesting concept. We get to know about the teacher. So this is an omniscient third-person narrator. All right, a couple more here. We have some that are going to try and trick you. So he had an entire box of candy in his locker, leftover Reese's and Snickers from the other day. It was such a big stash of candy, even Willy Wonka would have been jealous of it, and that's exactly why I am planning to get my hands on it. This one kind of tries to trick you, throw you for a loop. It starts out in third person, talking about he and him very objectively. It's not telling us he was waiting to see his candy. He couldn't wait to eat it. So it was objective third person at the beginning, but then right at the end it switches and tells us that the narrator, I, am planning to steal it. So then that, of course, overrides everything else in the passage and puts it into first person. Okay. Now, if it had somehow told us what this he, the unnamed he at the beginning, was planning to do with the candy, then we would have a problem on our hands because we would have a first-person narrator that knows what someone else is about to do. And unless you're writing a story about someone who's psychic, that would be a little strange and out of place. So let's try a couple more here. I think this might be the last one. Jamie and Trish showed up at 8. Okay, that doesn't tell us enough yet. That would be third person, though. Jamie and Trish, those are different people. We were having a sleepover to end all sleepovers. There it is. There would be pizza, chips, soda, and plenty of gossip. We were so excited. So this passage again starts out in third person with Jamie and Trish, but then switches to we. Now, we is a first-person pronoun. The narrator is included in that statement. So the narrator doesn't know exactly what Trish and Jamie are thinking, but they know that they are excited and they are planning to have a sleepover. So they can tell us their side of the story and kind of include their friends in it just because they're a part of the story. I was wrong. There's one more. Tony had never been to New York before. The big city was amazing. Aside from the occasional gust of hot, smelly air from the grates in the sidewalk, it was a very clean place to be. Tony looked straight up at the buildings that seemed to vanish in the sky. Now, this one's trying to throw you off by never using a pronoun. There's no he or she or they anywhere in this sentence. But if you remember, third person can also use names. So this is third person, and it is limited because we only have one character in the story. If Tony was there with a friend, and we also said that the friend thought it was an amazing city, then we'd be into omniscient territory. If we didn't say that Tony thought that the big city was amazing, then we would be into the objective territory. But since we say that he thinks it's amazing, we're getting to see inside of his head, then that means that we're limited. Okay, so take a second to think about that. Make sure that you have your examples written down on these points of view window notes, and go ahead and turn them in for a grade. I'll see you in class.